Hello again. This is a German song. I sage einfach hello again. This session is about new and improved PDF Toolbox engines, and I believe this is one of the feature-richest presentation and the feature-richest update that we ever did. Maybe not, but at least it comes close. And therefore, this session, we didn't say we have a very fixed end, so it might easily go slightly longer than I think 1 hour or so. It has definitely more features than that we want to present in any of the other sessions. Yeah, it is just the rest of all the features and the rest of those features that are based on an engine. So as David said, engines are powerful entities in pdfToolbox that kind of have their own life, so work according to their own rules. And therefore it makes sense to demonstrate them as well. So, and that's what we are going to do. We will have we will switch between David and myself, so also that you have some entertainment when we when we try to change the microphone quickly. So look forward to that. That is the agenda for today. So that the topics for the rest of the day. 12, 4, 6, 8, 10 different engines that we want to demonstrate to you. And instead of telling you the names of these topics, let's just start with the first one, which has the title Create Links from Text. And actually, I like this very much. It was an idea that a friend of mine brought to me, a graphic designer. What he wanted to do is he had some text and he wanted, in the text there are certain keywords, let's say a company name or so, and what he wanted to do is he wanted to have links in the text, in a PDF file that would be link annotations associated with the text area that would link that text area, that area where the text is in the PDF file, to some URL. And okay, that was too quick. So here is demo written because I wanted to demo that. And I have here, I wanted to do that in Acrobat, because in Acrobat I can see that, for instance, here I have pdfToolbox written, but that there are no links associated with that. And exactly that is what I want to change here. I have a new Fixup, which is called Create Links from Text, and I tell this Fixup search text, which is pdfToolbox. So find a text that is pdfToolbox and just add an annotation, a link annotation to there, that with the URL of the pdfToolbox product page. And then I have various other parameters here, but we don't need to look into that. We just want to try that out here. I'm saving to the result file into somewhere where I had previously been. Right, and here you can now see I have all instances of my pdfToolbox text here have a link associated with it, and when I click on here it brings me to the pdfToolbox product page. And of course there are smarter ways to do that, but I think that can be really useful, and that's what I wanted to show you here. And now comes the first instance of the microphone change.
Okay, we'll see whether we get any quicker as we do this. I'm not so sure actually, but we'll see. This is the second topic I have about optimization, I believe, in this pdfToolbox 12 overview. but it is partly slightly different, and I think the other part of it I already mentioned yesterday as well. So in many of the fix-ups in pdfToolbox, there is a concept of an apply to filter. And what that means is that you can run a fix-up on everything, just on everything in the document, and then it will modify or do changes wherever it thinks they need to be done. Or you can use an apply to filter so that you make a subset selection of the things that you want changed. And you can see an example here on my screen. This wants to rotate pages 90%, but then the default is always, so that means all pages are rotated. But then you can also specify a subset, and usually there are some defaults there. Here it's if portrait, if landscape, even pages, odd pages. So those are things that you don't have to insert there. They are always provided by pdfToolbox because, well, they make sense. And then there is an opportunity to write your own pre-flight checks. What you have there, the detect first page, is a pre-flight check that I've written. It's in my library, and because it's in the library, it shows up in the pull-down menu. And if I would say detect first page, that fix-up would be done only on the first page. Now, the problem in pdfToolbox 11 is that if you had one of those apply to filters in a fix-up, even if it was not used, you still might have a performance hit. Yeah, and so that is no longer the case in pdfToolbox 12. It's a bit of a strange item to list in a feature list because basically it's, I think, correcting something that, well, was wrong. But I think it's still important to mention it. It was causing a bit of a delay in the previous version. That's no longer the case now, so that could be of benefit. The other thing is something that is new. It, again, is not that difficult, but it's nice to mention that as well. What you see here is a fix-up called Convert Page Content into Image. And the problem with that fix-up is that you really want to make two selections. So this will convert pages into images, and you might say, well, I only want to convert pages to an image if they are too complex, if there are too many line art elements, for example. And then I might not want to rasterize everything. So maybe I don't want to rasterize the text that is on the page. But you couldn't do that in the past, and it requires something that pdfToolbox didn't know how to do, which is have two apply to filters in one fix-up. And that is exactly what you see here now. At the top there, you see apply to pages, and this is an apply to that makes a page selection, and these are then the pages that are going to be rasterized. And then when you look at the more at the bottom, where is the other one there? You have the accept page objects, and that one filters out page objects that shouldn't be included in the rasterization. So it's 2 times the same concept, and you might have to write 2 pre-flight checks to then use them in these filters. There is nothing more special about that than that. But it's worthwhile noting that this extension was there, and that if you're doing something with rasterization, go back to this fix-up, see whether this new option gives you any new capabilities. And then we need to do another change. Here we go.
Yeah, me again. And DPart again. Yeah, using DPart for quick calibrating. So I introduced you into that, into the concept, into the idea behind that in the last session when I was talking about standards. And since I believe the most of you were already there, so just really quickly, what is DPart? It's hierarchical page-based metadata. So in every PDF file, you have a page hierarchy, so a tree, where the pages are, And there is an addition, or there can be an additional tree now that has DPart metadata. And then there are associations between the two trees. And you see that here in our DPart viewer, we have here a tree structure. It could be more deeply nested. So this is just 2 levels here. It could have more. And then from leaves in the tree, there are relationships, there are connections to actual pages. So, and what we've learned, as I've just said, so RIPs are starting to use that DPart information, not exactly in the way it was intended. So they are they are actually not using or relying on any real metadata like key value pairs. What they do is they use the information that's also there, just where a record starts and where a record ends without any further metadata. They're using that information to improve processing time. Yeah. So, and what we make possible in pdfToolbox 12 to inject DPart structures. And as Olaf shown already on the first day, this is part of the quick fix tool, the new tool, which has a command inject simple DPart record, and that allows you to do so. And as Olaf has also said, there is a grouping expression here. In this case, it's 4 asterisks, which means records. So every 4th page in my PDF file has or should be flagged somehow in the DPart structure as being a record start. Yeah. There are more predefined grouping expressions. So 4 asterisks means 4 pages, 16 asterisks means 16 pages. Asterisk. Okay, David is happy. Asterisk. So, and guess what 10 asterisk would mean? Obelisk. No. So, and then there is another example, cover versus body pages, which is slightly more difficult. So we've got actually 3 record starts. So the first page in the PDF file, the 3rd page in the PDF file, and the last but 1 page in the PDF file. So, and that identifies 3 different records. But the grouping expression actually can also be a list of numbers, and then each number in the list would just specify a record start. And then there is a process plan, a predefined process plan in pdfToolbox 12 that allows you to dynamically create such a page list. So in this example, it is built so that it finds text with a certain size, which is then identified or interpreted as being a heading. And if any text that is where the text size is above this limit, then that text would be identified or interpreted as a heading, which means that page, the page where this particular text is, gets a record start. So let's see how that works. We can use the same PDF file that we had previously used. So just 71 pages from the toolbox overview. This is the original page without the links, but that doesn't really matter. Important to note is that we don't have DPart in here. So at the bottom where you would see a DPart button here, there isn't any such button. And then we should go to our predefined process plan here and just run it. And for this particular file, 14 doesn't make sense. So I've tried that before, and 24 makes sense here. So that is a reason why this is a variable. And then I save my result, I will get a PDF file that now has a DPart button here. And when I click on here, it shows me the DPart structure. And then let's go to this one. I can click on Start 3 and it shows me that indeed this page seems to be a cover page. Then when I go to the end of this record is page 3 to 9, then that is in this case not a start, but then on page 10, because again there is text with a big text size, there is a record start and so forth. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different records in this file. And then of course, if I, just because it's so much fun, if I would do that again and would just slightly go below 23.5, it should find more of these objects, and we can just override the file from before. And then we already see here, we've got a longer list of pages. And then when we open the DPart structure, it is a longer list indeed. And then when we, for instance, go to 12 to 11, it's now taking this text, which is slightly smaller, into account. So we've just got more pages here. This is the end of the page. And then on page 13, we have another record start. So I can use that information, the text size information, to build records. I can go even further if I want. I could easily modify this predefined process plan. So here we are using text size of headings, and I was just using one other check that I have here, which is image in content. So there is some image on that page. And when I use that instead, will of course create a different structure again. And now it has even more records. So, and basically every page where I have an image is now a record start. So page 10 doesn't have an image, but page 11 again has an image. So I can use whatever check I can build in order to identify record changes, and then apply that to the PDF file. For instance, if I have an invoice, I just have to find out what indication, what is specific about the first page of the invoice, and then I could easily create a DPart structure from that. But that is new in pdfToolbox 12, and we believe this is quite powerful. For all the real-world cases that we've heard of, they were already happy with fixed numbers of pages. So just a record structure where a new record starts on, for instance, every 4th page. But what we've implemented is much more powerful. Yeah, and that is just repeats what I have just shown. So how easy it is to just change the first check in the process, in this predefined process plan. It is not as easy as to change the microphone.
Okay. So meanwhile, if you have any questions, don't wait until the end. Let me just get that in there. Don't wait until the end. It's all separate topics that we're discussing. So if you have a question, just type it in the chat window or in the QA window that you have, and we have someone monitoring that as well, who can bring it to our attention. So no more DParts. Instead, license server. There are well, maybe I should, for those of you who haven't used license server or don't know exactly what it is, license server is a separate product. It is a license server. It's exactly what it does. So the name is very well chosen. What it allows you to do is, instead of doing an activation of a callas product on a particular machine, it allows you to set up a license server, usually on a dedicated machine, and then the callas product, instead of looking at the machine it's running on, will communicate with the license server, and it's a license server that decides whether it can run or not. And this has existed for a while now, about a year and a half. Is it longer? Maybe longer.
I think it's even longer. Yeah.
2 years. Time flies. So this has existed for a while, and it can cooperate. The license server can work with all of the callas products out there. But there were some things that were not possible and that we're just enabling in pdfToolbox 12. There was a possibility, normally in many contexts, the license server will be used in automated environments. So you're talking about using the command line version, for example. But it was already possible to also use the desktop version. And that can actually make a lot of sense. Assume that you have a school, and in this school you have classrooms, as you normally have. And then everyone in the classroom needs to have access to pdfToolbox desktop in this case. Then you could, of course, go through all the computers and activate the software on each computer, but that doesn't sound very much fun. So what you can do better in that case is you can have a license server, and then the software can just be installed on all these computers, and the activation will be taken care of just in the license server itself. So you don't have to go around and send emails from every computer and so on. So it worked with pdfToolbox desktop, but it didn't work with pdfToolbox server. And there is now, you can see it on the very bottom of that about dialog, there is an additional checkbox there that says use license server for server. And that means that if you launch pdfToolbox server, instead of looking for local license information, it will look for the license server. And the way it looks for the license server is still the same as before. That has not changed. So you can do UDP, or you can use specific URLs or IP addresses. That is still the same, but now it works for both, or it can work for both desktop and server. So that's one thing. The other thing that we have noticed over the last, well, we established the last 2 years, is that running a trial for license server can be quite challenging. And there are, in such a trial, 2 parts. The one is that you will have to do some changes in, for example, the command line that you use in pdfToolbox CLI. Yeah? And that is one thing. That's an implementation change that is more on the side of whatever script or application you use to automate the pdfToolbox CLI. The other thing is that you might want to test the license server installation and operation itself. And in many environments, you want to do both. If you don't want to do both, if all you're interested in is to trial pdfToolbox or PDFA pilot PDF chip in combination with a license server, but you don't want to really go through the whole process of installing your own license server, then there is now a solution for that as well. And you could call that license server Lite, but it's a trial version of the license server. And what that means is that, and this is something that you have to request, it is not publicly available, you just have to talk to us about it. What it means that you can get a temporary license key for a license server and a URL to a license server that is hosted in the cloud. So you don't have to install it anywhere. It has already been installed. It is always on, it's running. You just need to know where it is, and you need to have a key that you can use with that. And so that means you can test an integration between pdfToolbox and a license server without having to go through all the steps to actually install a license server and activate it and install cartridges on it, and so on and so on. Just be careful with that, because of course in many circumstances testing the license server itself, or license servers, because you can have multiple of those in a redundant environment, can be just as important as all the other stuff. Yeah, it is of course not just the changes you need to do on the pdfToolbox side. It is very often well, the challenge is also a bit in how do we install license server on what machine, and so on and so on. And this is something that in this particular case you won't test. If you use this trial version of the license server, you're not going to be testing yeah, all the complexities that come into play for that.
There's a question.
For me or for Dietrich?
For David.
Oh.
So the question is, could I use the license server for floating licenses for my desktop users who only sometimes need pdfToolbox for checking a PDF?
Strangely enough, that is exactly why it was implemented. So yes, absolutely. The scenario that I described with these students is very similar in that sense. But definitely you could do that. So hypothetical situation where you have 10 users, but only 5 of them are going to be ever using pdfToolbox, a classic definition of a floating license situation. You would need to install a license server. There is also a cost involved with that. Let's be very clear about that. But you could install a license server, and for all of the desktop licenses, you would point them to the license server, and that's all you have to do. As long as someone is using pdfToolbox desktop, they will occupy one slot on the license server. When they quit it, that slot is freed up and someone else can use it. Yeah. And when you look at license server, there is a cost for the license server itself. And then next to that, there is a cartridge, and the cartridge determines, in the case of pdfToolbox desktop, it determines how many pdfToolbox desktop licenses you can run at the same time. So yes.
And the next question is, when using CLI in Switch, is it now possible to have one generic setting with license server URLs to use for any pdfToolbox configurator?
Say that again. I think the question is, okay, I think in Switch, the license server setup is still at the level of the configurator when you drag it into the workflow. So you would still have to configure them individually, as far as I know. Yeah. The only thing that you can do in Switch, and this is, even though I go quite a ways back with Switch, what you can do, and something that I started doing not so long ago, is that they have something that is called copy element attributes or something like that. So if you right click on an element, you can say copy attributes or properties. And then you can select a different element and say paste, and that will take all the settings you had on one element and then apply them to the other element. So once you have one element that, like in a pdfToolbox Actions configurator, once you have one such element in a workflow that is correctly set up, you could use that technique to copy all of the attributes to the second one that you're inserting, and then just change the action that you want for the second one and the other parameters afterwards. At least that will save you from copy and pasting all the individual attributes or typing stuff in all the time. So that should be a little bit helpful, but it's still on an individual configurator level, yes.
Next question, is there an option for offline use of floating licenses?
That depends what you mean by offline use. In fact, usually the license server is technically offline. Yeah. So the license server behaves like a regular a regular callas product. That means the license server will need to be installed on a machine. It needs to be activated. In order to be activated, it needs either internet access or you have to do offline activation, again, for the license server. But once the license server has been activated, that is fine. The communication between the rest of the work is communication between pdfToolbox, for example, and the license server. And that technically is offline because all you need is a way to connect from pdfToolbox to the license server. And that can, of course, be, and usually is, over something that is also connected to the internet, but it could very well be on an intranet that is not connected to the internet itself. Yeah? You don't need an internet connection for that. You just need to be able to go from computer A that runs pdfToolbox to computer B that runs the license server. And there are other ways of doing that than going through the internet. As long as they're all on the same internal network, that would work just as well. So the license server is, and let's be very clear about that, the license server is a regular application that needs to be installed somewhere. Yeah? It doesn't necessarily need to be installed in the cloud. This new thing that I just introduced is just for trial scenarios. There is a license server that is installed in the cloud, so you don't necessarily have to do it. You won't be able to use that in production. It is only for trial. And a production license server you can install wherever you want.
There's an explanation to the question. Can you give a floating seed to user for a certain time? Like one example being 1 week.
No, there are no time limits, but I believe if a license is no longer active, it will be given up anyway, right? Yeah. So if pdfToolbox desktop crashes, for example, not that it ever does, let's be clear. But if the product would crash and it's not able to release its license proactively with the license server, then there is a timeout, so it will be released anyway. Yeah. In the context of a classroom, and even in a company, I guess, if all students, upon hearing the bell ring, rush out and don't do anything, but they just switch off their computer, then those licenses will still be freed up after a certain period of time. If you have a really specific setup and you wonder whether this would work or not in your setup, feel free to just send an email to us, and we'll be more than happy to help you. You can send it to any of us, or what is also always good is support@callassoftware.com or support@4piece.com. Both of those will work.
And now the last question.
Okay.
Can you use trial license server for Dockerized pdfToolbox server?
Very good question. One that I've dealt with a lot. Yes and no. Let me explain that. So the problem with Docker is that it's typically a temporary server, a temporary system, small temporary system usually. The limitation that you have is that, as I said before, the license server needs to be installed on a permanent system. The reason for that is that you need to activate it. And of course, also, if you're then using pdfToolbox must be able to communicate with the license server, and that typically is also done by IP address or URL or whatever. So it's not a good idea, it's not feasible to install the license server itself on a Docker image in a Dockerized environment, but it is possible if you have the license server or license servers. You really should have multiple if you're talking about that kind of environment, which does not make a difference in price, by the way. You just buy license server, whether you run 1 or 3, that doesn't make a difference. But the license server itself needs to be on a real machine, a static machine somehow, and that can still be, for example, an EC2 Amazon server. That is good. The license server needs to run on such a machine. Everything else can run in a Dockerized environment or in the Amazon automatic server clone environment, whatever the mirroring thing that they have. So that is supported. The license server itself needs to be installed outside of that environment. Good. Bleed.
Yeah, let me just add to that, because I'm surprised. I'm happy that there are so many questions about the license server. I believe the last question was slightly different. So the question is whether you could use the license server trial, so the thing that we have set up in the internet with a Docker environment. And technically, yes. However, the name already says it's a trial thing, so it's not intended to be used for production. And the simple reason is we don't have any SLAs there. So it's just a simple Amazon server which is as reliable and has as good uptimes as usual in Amazon. It is not designed for production. In production, we would, on our end, have to provide much more stability and failover, and we haven't done so. But let us know. I mean, the question makes a lot of sense to me, and yeah, is understandable. We've just not have done that yet, but obviously we could. So just keep asking, and here the best address indeed to ask would be David or someone from 4Ps, because they deal with project callas only with OEMs. So just let 4Ps know. We are in constant contact with each other and would be happy to learn. We already know from a few of you that you would be interested in that. On one end, it would be lots of effort to do that. So we don't have any experience with setting up 100% available system, but we all know that it's doable so far. What else is doable? To create bleed if needed. So I admit there were better ways to change the topic before, but let's use this one anyway. So there is a new version of the check and bleed process plan that had been developed by Calibrate and that was introduced with pdfToolbox 11. Calibrate has provided us with an update to that. And what you see here is for a particular file, the output of the process plan as it was in pdfToolbox 11. And for each edge of the page, bottom, left, right, you see a list of pages which have bleed problems at that particular edge of the page. In the new version, this has been changed to be categorized. So I have more checks if you want, and then I have one check, one problem being indicated for each combination of page edges that is present in a PDF file. So here I see that page 1 has problems at the left and at the bottom edge, and page 3 has problems at the left and the right edge. And then once I've seen that, I'm sure that page 1 doesn't have any problems at the top or in the right edge. So I hope this makes sense. So it's better grouping and probably easier to understand which pages have what problems. And that's already the improvement here, which brings David back on stage.
Okay, variables. We love variables. There is a thing that when I give training, I always tell people that they should be a little bit careful about, and now I won't have to say that anymore because it's changing. But if you look at the screenshot that is there, this is part of the conditions you have to make a check. And you can see that there is something called trim box width, and then there in inch, trim box width in millimeter. So the same condition, but for different units, measurement units. And that is, of course, a little bit unfortunate. When you have a whole bunch of those, you start to multiply the number of conditions. That has been changed in pdfToolbox 12. So I did the same search in pdfToolbox 12, and you can see that there is something called trim box width now, but that's the only one. In other words, the measurement units is no longer part of the individual, the different conditions, but it's actually been implemented in the condition now. And if you would look at that condition, you get what is visible here, which is basically the same as it was before, but now you have a measurement unit setting at the end of that. The additional advantage that you have with that is that now this measurement unit is, of course, also controllable with a variable. If it's different conditions, then the condition is either in the check or not, and we still don't have JavaScript-based checks, so you can't work around it that way. Believe me, that's on my personal feature request list, but we don't have that yet. But here you can still do it, because it's no longer different conditions. It has just been integrated into an existing condition, and it's set here by millimeter, but now I could use a variable that controls whether it's millimeter, inch, or something else. You might not always need that, but if you need to control this from variables, it is now possible. There is then, of course, the question, what happens in this transition? Because now we're making an incompatible change if you want. However, that is not really the case. The old style conditions are no longer there, no longer visible there. So you won't be able to make a new check and use one of those old style conditions. You will have to use the new one. But when you have a profile or a check that uses these conditions and you import it into pdfToolbox 12, or you do an upgrade from 11 to 12, then these conditions will be upgraded automatically and the behavior will not change. You just have now the opportunity, the possibility to control them with variables. But from a functionality point of view, in this profile that you had, nothing is going to change. More bleed.
Yes, I love to bleed. Smart bleed is more, I guess. Actually, it's a completely new method. So last time around in pdfToolbox 11, we introduced bleed for regular shapes. Now we are introducing something, a new method that is called stretch border area. It is a method that is available in the existing Fixup, generate bleed at page edges. So, and stretch board area, what does it do? So it always creates an image. And instead of showing it in a demo, I've just created a comparison between the three different methods. So in fact, we have 4, because mirroring can not just mirror the page as an image, it can also mirror the page PDF objects as objects. But anyway, this from a visibility point of view, or what you could see in my example here, doesn't make a difference. So what, however, makes a difference, so you see here some flowers, and this is a typical subject, a typical PDF file where you may want to use this new method. So some structures, some patterns, some irregular things that are distributed on the PDF page. So, and here you see pixel repetition may work if you don't need lots of bleed, but it will soon look strange when you need more than just a small bleed area here. So yeah, as you see, it just repeats pixels. For these types of patterns, mirroring is similar, so it only would work good, in this case even less good than pixel repetition, because it mirrors the angle where the object gets to the trim box. And here the stretching works much better. What the stretching needs to do, it goes slightly inside of the trim box, so it has and it will slightly modify the printed stuff inside of the trim box. So there needs to be, you need to do this or apply this only with care. So, but we've learned from partners that this method is used often in large format, for instance, or maybe for textile, where it doesn't make a big difference, that there are slight differences inside of the trim box, where you may need bigger bleed zones, bigger bleed areas. So you need to understand what it does, and then you need to make an informed decision about what method you want to use. Here is another example from a leaflet. Typically nothing that you would want to use this new method with. However, I also think this shows good how the method works. So here I've got pixel repetition, and I have this line here on the floor from a tennis court, and then of course I have an angle, and then just on 90 degrees to the trim box, this line goes on. With mirroring, again, this line even builds an angle here at the end, and with stretching, this line is slightly moved to the 90 degrees thing, 90 degrees lines, but not at a certain spot, right? So in a way, this one is the one that appears most natural somehow. However, again, this really depends on what is on the PDF file. So you can't, of course, use this with text, but none of these methods really works well with text. Yeah. And then this thing has some parameters. Two of them are unique for this method. So the layout of the Fixup has also slightly changed, so that parameters, the available parameters, depend on the method that you select. So select a method, and then the parameters are available that make sense for this particular method. And then for this one, stretching, you have a source width, and that specifies how far you go inside of the trim box. So I think the unit here is millimeter. So in my example, on the left edge side of the page, it would go 2 millimeters inside of the trim box, and from there on, it would slightly stretch the content outwards. And then when it stretches, it doesn't do that in a linear way. So it just duplicates the first scan line if you want. It does this exponentially. So, and then you can specify how slow the thing starts, and how strong the difference is between where you start and where you end. So it starts slowly, and with a higher stretch factor, it would start, I believe, more slowly, and then go up faster. So yeah, probably you need to play around a little bit with that until you find right settings for your particular setup. Okay, that's for Smart Bleed. Now for Smart David.
Meanwhile, Dietrich is breaking down our carefully coordinated light setup here. So if there,
far for Smart David.
if there are some light differences, it's because things are moving around here. It's a good thing that we said that this session would take longer than 45 minutes because we're already there. So let's talk about another one, and this is on creating pull pockets. What was it in German again? Hemstitch?
No, Hemstitch is also English.
Yeah. Oh, so what is it in German then?
I don't know.
It was the same actually, I think. Okay, so someone will know who is in the chat, I'm sure. Pull pockets in English, and what this is, and you can see an illustration of that, is that very often in large format when you... I think I'm going to wait for the chat to give me the right answer. When you print something, what? I can't say that.
Smart David.
Holzaumbanner. So very often when you print something in large format that is a banner or a flag or something like that, it needs to be attached, and there are different ways of attaching it. Grommets is one of them. So where you have rings that are put in the material and then that is stretched out with rope or something. And this is another technique where there is something that it wraps around. And it's often used at the top of something because, well, gravity, it has to hang down from something. But it's also very often used at the bottom. And sometimes that is to stretch the material, but sometimes it's also just, and so stretch meaning at a fixed bottom edge, and then the bottom pull in this example would also be connected to something. But it can also be just inserted at the bottom to give it a little bit of weight so that the wind doesn't move it that much, and it doesn't look wrinkled, and it's nicely open and so on. Anyway, when you deliver something for a design for this kind of application, then of course you have a bit of a problem because you have to know how much material do I have to provide extra. You have to prepare the design for that and so on, and that is not very, very simple to do. And so sometimes there is a need when you receive files from clients that you need to take the design that they have, which was not created for pull pockets, and then you need to create additional content that can be used in finishing afterwards. If you go to the large format print area in pdfToolbox, that was introduced in pdfToolbox 11, in the version 12, you will now see an additional item in there for creating these, well, it's called pull banner in here, and you see the little icon at the bottom right in there, and on the right hand side you have the properties for that new functionality as well. And so the purpose of this is really to take something that hasn't been prepared correctly for this type of application and to well, to prepare it for it, add additional space to it, and so on. Add bleed, whatever needs to be done. There are a number of options, as you could see on the previous slide as well. For example, you can have a situation where it's not just a single print. It is very often a double print, because you have a front and a back of these kinds of things. And the front and the back can be identical, but it can also be different. And then you need to know whether the end result should be delivered as one much bigger file that gets done printed in one go, or whether it should be split up into individual segments that are then going to be printed and then put together. You need to be able to specify whether you want these pole pockets at the bottom, at the top, or both. You can have situations where you want to mark the pole pockets so that it's in finishing easier afterwards to handle them correctly. And then of course you have things like how high do they need to be, which is determined by the thickness of the actual support that you're going to use, and how much bleed do you require for these as well. And the end result, and I'm not going to, I've done that very nicely, and I probably can't move enough to get out of the way. I think I'm going to disappear at some point. There we go. So I'll go away to the other side there. I feel like the weather girl now. Instead of doing this in a demo, you have an example here, and I'll leave it to all of you to actually experiment with that. What you see on the left-hand side is what comes in this case, which is a PDF file with 2 pages, front and back. And what you see on the right-hand side is an example of how this would look when it has been well prepared for this type of application. So if this is something that you do, or you have customers who do this, take some sample files and try it out in your copy of pdfToolbox 12.
There is a question: is pole pocket available as CLI action?
Yes, I want to say.
It's a profile. No?
It's a profile, so it's not an action in the CLI. So as you know, you can do 2 things in the CLI. You can run profiles or process plans, and you have actions. This is not a separate action, but it's a profile, and you should be able to start from this profile or process plan to do things. What I don't know is whether it's included by default in version 12, this profile. That's something I would have to find out. Yeah. If you want to explore this, again, just write us an email and we'll be happy to look with you what the best way is to do this in the CLI.
Yeah, just to complete this, it is available as a predefined profile for sure in pdfToolbox desktop. I'm not sure whether it's in the predefined KFPX files that come with the CLI, but it would be easy to export it from the desktop tool and then use it in CLI. But anyway, next topic is OCR. OCR definitely is a new topic and definitely is a new engine that lives inside of a new Fixup in pdfToolbox. We are using a free OCR tool here, open source Tesseract, which has a long time ago been developed by Xerox at one point. And who then made that publicly available. So we've integrated that technology. And just to introduce you into OCR, we all know, I mean, OCR is not the most important topic in prepress. However, more and more we need to publish PDF files for the internet or somewhere else, or we just want to make sure that text is searchable in a PDF file that we have prepared for print, but now want to archive, whatever. So in any case, pdfToolbox allows you to add text, text information, character information to text that otherwise doesn't have it. And PDF has a smart way to do that. So an OCR engine would usually add the text in an invisible way. And for that purpose, PDF introduced a specific render mode, which is called render mode 3. And text that is placed and positioned in text render mode 3 is never rendered when the PDF file is rendered on screen or when it's printed. It's just invisible. However, a PDF viewer can access it and use it as any other text. So you can select the text, you can search for the text, you can copy the text out of the PDF file. All of that is possible with text in render mode 3. And this OCR engine is available in pdfToolbox in 2 places. One is it is a switchboard action, and the other it is a Fixup. So we are looking here at the switchboard action. I don't have a demonstration for this engine because it is text render mode 3. As I've said, it's invisible, so we won't see much. And what I want to say here, it's easier to describe it with slides. So what our implementation of OCR does, it adds a text to the PDF file. It adds a font to the PDF file, which is called glyphless font. And that makes a lot of sense because indeed that font doesn't have glyphs. It only has Unicode information for the characters. And Unicode means that the character doesn't have a shape, so the shape is already there. In fact, that was the input for our OCR engine, but that shape didn't have a meaning. So let's start with the first character in callas. So there is a small letter C, and that can be rendered on screen. However, the engine doesn't, the viewer doesn't know that this is a small letter C, it just has a shape. And the OCR engine would add that information to that character that this is a small letter C. And in order to, and then an OCR engine needs to have language. So the OCR engine, all OCR engines work better if they know what language the text is using. And therefore, I have created a simple sentence here, or a simple statement, where I was using as many German umlauts as I could come up with. And just for you, for the ones that don't speak English, the German, it basically says you can be happy with callas because you get frequent updates to older versions. And now we have pdfToolbox 12 and 12. The German 12 means 12. First thing that I want to mention, you have the ability in pdfToolbox to make invisible text using render mode 3 visible simply by changing the render mode. But that wouldn't help you a lot with this text here because, as I've said, it doesn't have glyphs. So the only thing that you will see is a not def here, an indication that there is some text. However, there is no outline available for the text. So that doesn't help a lot. However, I've tried it, and what we see here, just to demonstrate that language is important. If I use OCR with an English language setting, I don't get, or I only get one of these umlauts, which is the 12 in pdfToolbox, and all of the others are gone. It's still understandable, the I here is even interpreted as an L. So something in I, of course, you can perfectly have an I in English. It's just the word by that is used in German isn't known in English. And then they've decided that this could be bell, whatever that is in English. But anyway, you see, language is important. So whenever you know what language is used, then you specify it. And that brings me, and probably also you, to the next question. So in the defaults, and when you install pdfToolbox 12, you can only pick German or English, but you may want to OCR such text here, which only in some areas uses English, but most of it is actually Japanese. And I was just using a license, a PDF from pdfToolbox, which is time limited, so you don't have to copy the code here. It already is expired, so I was careful. But anyway, so now what can we do about that? At the bottom of this dialog, you have the options menu, and there, for this particular action, you will find Manage Language Trained Data, and that allows you to add trained data to the engine. Background here is the trained data information is not small, so it would have added several megabytes to pdfToolbox if you would have added all available language trained data. So we've decided to rather be informative about how something can be added here. And that's the reason why I'm explaining it here as well. So when you select that item here, it will open that folder that lives in the internal preferences of pdfToolbox, where you can see you have Eng and Doi, which means English and Deutsch. So these are international ISO abbreviations for languages. And here is where you would want, for instance, for French, have FRA dot trained data. For Japanese, you would want to have JAP dot trained data. And the question now is where can you get them from? There is a GitHub repository for Tesseract users, and there are various language trained data files. For instance, you see here I have added Japanese, so it's not JPA, it's JPN, but whatever. And we have explained how to do that in our manual. And that means two things. You don't have to listen to me explaining that now. And the other thing is it's very easy to find out for yourself. So, and we've even assigned a subdomain to callassoftware.com to this particular page of the online documentation. So just type in ocr.callassoftware.com. It will bring you to one page in the Callas Software online documentation, and there you can find out what the best source is for trained data and how, and then you would just download it from there and put it into that folder, and that's it. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's fairly easy. It takes you just a couple of seconds, maybe minutes for the first time, and then you should be there. So now we were in interactive switchboard mode. The same thing is of course possible in an automated way via a Fixup, create invisible text via OCR. And here it's possible to not just use one language setting, but several. An automation where you don't necessarily know what files come in, you may want to be prepared for more than just one language. So maybe part of your PDF files are Germans and the other English and maybe even French or whatsoever. Then important is if you can't specify that any further, so the best results you will definitely get if you can specify just one language. If you can't specify that, then you can enter here more than just one language, but then order is important. So when the majority of your files are German, then you should use this setting. If the majority is English, you should it the other way around. Okay? And then the engine would read the specifications here. If you would type in JPN, for instance, for Japanese, without having loaded the trained data beforehand, you would get a Fixup error. Yeah. Yeah, and one more thing. This is, as I've said, I mean, it's somewhat difficult. I mean, the way is PDF allows you to add OCR text. The bad it is when you want to find out how good the OCR result is. For that reason, it's now possible in test mode to see the OCR result. So when you use this Fixup in test mode, there is an additional entry here that says OCR preview, and that shows you what came back from the OCR engine. Okay, and that is the easiest way to find out how good your results are. Another way would be to extract text from the result PDF and to look at that, but this is obviously much faster. Yeah. One more thing, which is kind of unique, I think, in pdfToolbox, because you can do so many other things. What you could do, for instance, you have a PDF page which already is quite good. So most of the text on the page has Unicode, so can be looked for and everything. However, and then there is a check for that, there is some text on the page that doesn't have Unicode. So in my previous session here on standards, I said sometimes there are bullet points that don't have Unicode. So then you can use use the engine to only OCR the text that doesn't have Unicode. And that uses the feature that David also has just mentioned in the apply to feature. So you create an intermediate image, of course, of the page that is then put into the OCR engine. And if you use the apply to filter here in the Fixup, then you can filter what content from the page goes into the intermediate image. So you could as well say only do that for any images that are placed on the PDF page that you're currently processing or whatsoever. So you can specify what content of the page is to be OCR'd. And that's this. And now we need to wake up David.
Okay, is this the last topic?
I'm not sure.
I think so. Huh? We'll see. So this is something I think where it's not going to be as important for everyone. But if you're someone for whom this is important, it is going to be really nice. And I find myself in the group of people for whom this is actually very interesting. So let me explain what it is. The title is already kind of self-explanatory, saving profiles for previous versions. What that means is that there is a solution for this particular problem here. The problem is that profiles and process plans in pdfToolbox, whatever, until version 12, are forward compatible and not backwards. And I always mix these terms up, so I hope I got them correct this time. And to be sure, I explained it underneath. So what that means is if I create a profile in pdfToolbox 10, I can open it, of course, in pdfToolbox 10. I can also open it in pdfToolbox 12, and that will work without any problem. Functionality-wise, I won't have any issues. If I'm creating a profile in version 12, and then I give it to someone, to Dietrich, for example, who doesn't have 12 because his license key was expired, as we saw, and he's using 11, and that is not going to work. And the stupid thing is, even though everything I use in that profile has been available since pdfToolbox 6 or whatever, it's still not going to work in pdfToolbox 11 because there is a version change between the two major versions, and pdfToolbox will just say, no, I can't read this, this is too new. Yeah? So even though the functionality, the features in the profile might be old enough to work in pdfToolbox 11, pdfToolbox 11 is simply not going to import it. It's not going to allow you to import it because it's too new. And of course, if you have to maintain multiple versions of pdfToolbox for some reason, because in your company you are using multiple versions, or because you have customers who are using another version, an older version, then that is a bit of a problem. And in pdfToolbox 11 and before that, there was really no good solution for that. Now in pdfToolbox 12, there is something new that was implemented, which is called export to previous version. And that should, at least to some extent, and actually to a large extent, I believe, resolve the issue. Of course, it's only available in pdfToolbox 12, but if you are using version 12 and you go to a profile process plan, then you can do export to previous version. And what you get is a dialog box that will tell you what the earliest version is to which the profile that you selected can be exported. You don't have to choose. Yeah? So it's not asking you what your target version is. What pdfToolbox is going to do with limits, and I'll come back to that in a second, what pdfToolbox is going to do is it's going to look at the features that are used inside of that profile or process plan. It's going to decide what the earliest version of pdfToolbox was that could support those features. And then it's going to automatically export something that is compatible with that version. However, you can see on the screen there that it says is callas pdfToolbox 10. It is limited to pdfToolbox 10. Yeah. So it can export something as, at the moment, it can export something as pdfToolbox 11 or as pdfToolbox 10, but it's not going to go back before that. But so if I use something that uses version 11 features, then this dialog box will automatically read version 11, and that's the version I'm going to get. And that means it's still not going to work in version 10, but it's never intended to. It contains something that is too modern for version 10. So that would be absolutely correct. Yeah? If it finds that everything you have in your profile or process plan also exists in version 10, then it's going to export it as a version 10 profile. And I imagine as we go to higher versions, that we'll have to see where the cutoff point is, whether we continue to export this to version 10 or only take a few versions into account. And I could show this, but I think this has been long enough by now. So that was the last thing that we wanted to show you, at least today. And there are 2 more days. If you have any questions about any of the topics, now would be a really good way of a really good moment to ask them. On the screen, just as a recap, you can once more see all the things that we talked about. Are there any questions?
Yes.
And we'll have to see for who they are, but
This question came in when you were explaining variables for units. So there's what if a user runs a version 11 script on version 12 CLI?
that is actually a really good point. I believe that they will be upgraded. So if you have a profile that was exported from version 11, and then you run it using pdfToolbox 12 CLI, is what I understand, without exporting it from pdfToolbox 12, but that will just work, yes?
But I mean,
Steal my microphone.
yes, it will just work. No, in fact, the checks are still there. They are just not visible in desktop. So everything will work as expected and as before. The only thing is you can't configure them in a new check. That's it?
There's Another question. When exporting a profile, have you considered allowing a user to remove a check if it doesn't work in an earlier version?
Yeah. Good question. We had considered that. However, we thought it's really getting difficult, because then you would want to go downwards to parameters. So a check or a fixup better might just have been changed, or just one feature had been added. So you would have to come up with a very cumbersome and difficult to understand user interface. It would take us very long to implement that, and we are afraid that it's not so helpful for everybody. However, what you can see here is on the screen an article that we have created instead, and that lists all features basically that can show up in a profile, and show in which version they had been implemented for the first time. So if somebody really needs that feature, then he can go to that page and look up the features that are used in the profile to find out. And we believe probably everybody has a little bit of a feeling. So if everybody who works with different versions of pdfToolbox has at least a little bit of a feeling what could be the culprit here, and then could hopefully easily find out what the problem is. Okay. Thanks. Yeah, as David just said, and I couldn't have said better, tomorrow is yet another day of this week full of new pdfToolbox 12 features. And tomorrow is a real David day, so you can look forward to that. David will have a session on new process plan features at 3. Then we have a mixed session about color, and then another thing more specific concepts and ideas about color when it comes to output and output optimization of color for output devices. Yeah, we again think this makes up for lots of new, hopefully interesting features for you. And we would be glad to see you again tomorrow. Anything else, guys? No, huh? Cheers.